new grant, so the 2023 ESS grant is another one that we're working towards completing, and we'll look at having that one hopefully completed by next year. So that's where we sit with grants. Does anybody have any questions about that before I move on? Okay. Another thing that was definitely noted during the cold water flood that was something that was immediately rectified was the fact that we were pulling people from different departments to come fulfill certain functions within the EOC, and it was something that they weren't necessarily familiar with. So some time was put into creating some guidebooks so that if you were sitting in a finance section or a planning role and you had a specific job, there's now a guidebook that you can kind of turn to, and you can spend 5 or 10 minutes having an idea of what the expectation is for that role. And what it allows is, rather than having someone kind of teach you in the moment how to be successful in that position, we've already kind of got the ball rolling with this guidebook. So that's been a really big component. The other thing has been trying to prep the EOC closet. So it's gone through a number of different kind of overhauls. We've been able to move the ESS stuff out of there, which has provided us some more room. So now when you go in, you can find things. It's kind of sorted out. Each section has their mobile bins that they can pull out, and I'm happy to show that after this if you're interested.
Your Worship, thank you very much, Your Worship. I want to give Krista a bit of a kudos or shout out here, because as she said, we identified this as a problem pretty early on, and not always for the reasons you would expect. Sometimes the section chief would know exactly what needs to happen. So-and-so, I need you to prepare the situation report for this operational period. And you've got somebody in there saying, situation report, operational period? And they're not wanting to look like fools, but at the same time, sometimes there were questions asked, and they're good and reasonable questions to be asking, but they would, okay, now I know what a situation report is. I know what an operational period is, but where do I go get the template? Who do I email this thing to? What is the right level of information to be including in this report? And so there's so many layers to actually being able to step into any one of these roles and feel like you can add value. And so do want to give Krista credit here, because she's not just thought through like the first layer questions, but how can we get this to the spot where a person is going to have a higher degree of confidence with this how-to guide for them being able to fill their responsibilities. I'd say just the same way Krista referenced on the finance side, you know, we have to make things called resource requests or submit expense authorization forms, and there are different processes and different reasons for doing these, and it's really easy to not do the right thing in the moment. And if you don't do the right thing in the moment, you don't pay for it in the moment. You pay for it 7 months down the road when a claim gets denied because you didn't do this. Well, you didn't have your expense authorization form submitted. Well, we did it through a resource request. We thought you were supposed to go, well, and you end up in all of these fights after the fact. And so I just, this sounds like a small thing when Krista said it, but it's a really, really big thing, and it's continuing to get better. And you should be really proud of the level of work and effort that went into making those, because it is allowing people to step in, or will allow people to step into those roles in a much better position than what they did the first time around. Because I don't want to undersell the complexity of it. In that moment, things move fast, and you want people to pick up on it like this or know where they can go like this. And if there's somebody not sure what to do when the next people that they would be asking are already on to something else, it's just so helpful to have a guide say, all right, I'll take 5 minutes and familiarize myself here and move on. So, yeah, kudos.
That's really good. Just so that whoever's stepping into those roles can feel confident in that they're becoming an effective part of the overall team.
And I think that's the thing, right? Ultimately, we want any staff member that steps into a site level response or into the EOC or is continuing to provide business continuity. We want them to be able to kind of still come to work, be successful in the role that they're that they're providing, the service that they're providing to the community. And then we want them to be able to return home and feel like their efforts had value and they're prepared to do it another day. So other things that we have in the works right now. So I had a meeting last week, and I'm in the process of completing a disaster psychosocial support plan. This is a plan that is going to be supported with some help from Interior Health. I'm working with an individual who's making sure I've got the right framework here. And this is ultimately designed to ensure that when we hit an activation, there are benchmarks that we know are going to immediately start the ball rolling as far as activating mental health supports for our staff. We recognize that that's really important, and it's really easy to kind of sink yourself into the situation and push those things aside. But we know that early intervention can really reduce the effects of long-term mental illness. So this is going to help support us there. Another thing that we have working in draft right now is our emergency support services plan. So a document that kind of exists. This is an interesting one because not many communities have a succinct plan, or they have a plan that has a lot of policies and procedures that are linked to it. And so I've really tried to break those up. When you guys get an opportunity to review it, it will talk about the framework and what we're trying to achieve with the program. And then on an operational level, we will have standard operating guidelines and procedures to make sure that the team is adequately prepared for whatever type of response they might see. So we're in the works of completing that one. Another one that we're also in draft on is our emergency preparedness education plan. So right now, any materials that go out to community they don't come out as frequently as I would like, and they're very situational and responsive based. What we would like to do is get to a place where we have created some social media planning, some annual planning, and some programming both within the school systems and for older adults and adult education level, so that people are focused on the preparedness piece and we're not so reactive to situations as they occur. So another plan that we're working really hard on developing, and that's done both by myself and then in tandem working with our communications manager to make sure that we're aligning a lot of those pieces. Please.
When you say we, who are you meaning?
So all of these plans are in-house plans, meaning that I'm the primary person writing the plans. Depending on the level of plan, I engage with other stakeholders. So Sean's involved with them certainly, and then, for example, the EPE will be bringing Kim in to kind of talk about the best way to kind of go forward with those processes. Generally speaking, we're kind of doing things a little bit backwards in that typically when you start a plan, you start with a stakeholders meeting, you gather as much information, and then you move forward with the plan. But because we don't have a lot of plans in place at this moment, and so rather than not having any framework, I've opted to kind of start this so we at least have an initial draft, and then moving forward, going to those stakeholders and bringing in more outside agencies to take a look at it, because these plans can be amended, but I hate the idea of there being nothing kind of in existence that doesn't live outside of my brain. I don't think that's helpful for our program or our community. So it's really about taking what's in here and getting it onto a piece of paper. So hopefully I don't, but if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, somebody can pick up and carry the torch.
I'm just wondering,
yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That was the big one that I'm like, all right, I know what she's getting at here. So you'll note all of these are draft. We're not usually going to show you the first graph of something. We want you to have something that we think is you will get it before it's the final adopted plan, because it'll come here for review and discussion, and then ultimately it gets adopted at the council level on your recommendation. That's how we see the flow moving through. So you're kind of the last stop before it gets to council, and if you kick it back to us with suggestions or whatever the case is, then we'll take it back. Then it'll come back to you. Once it gets your thumbs up, it comes back to council for adoption as part of our emergency planning framework. The key for us is that we want to make sure that we've bandied this about internally, so that when it comes forward to you, because when it comes forward in draft format, it's a public document at that point, it's going to be something that we can stand by, that's implementable, that is at a level where it's not just kind of ideas on a page. So we promise that you will see all of these before their adoption date.
We're educating, the personnel, the staff, et cetera, and council. Where does the community fit in this? Where do we do community education?
So the community education piece is really based out of the EPE, the Emergency Preparedness Education Plan. So that one is specific to community members. So the plan in its very draft format right now goes over things like it goes over how we're reaching the public. So social media, traditional media, what kind of demographics we can expect to hit based on those different avenues. It goes over things like in-house training programs for youth. So maybe we're going to be putting on some programming for a grade 3 class or a grade 7 class, and those are obviously going to look a little bit different with similar types of messaging. So this plan is designed to give some framework to where they can find that sort of information. So.
Krista and I have talked about ways to get it out to the community once we have some plans done, like a garbage hanger or a door hanger, a card that is easily read. Not all the information that's on that, but enough to get somebody comfortable with who to call, all the numbers to call, where to go, yada, that kind of stuff. So we've talked about that. So I'm not sure where we are on that, but we have bantied that about, because some people are not going to read the paper. Some people are not going to go to the websites. So if you cover all your bases, and if you have a door hanger, like, your new phone book is here, and you put that there, then it'll be very basic, but enough to let people know that, hey, maybe I should check that site. And of course, that information will be on the site where you can go see it as well. So you got to cover all your bases.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Charney. I think it is, as Krista indicated, the Emergency Preparedness Education Plan, ideally we're going to have all of these types of comments holistically built into that plan. To give you a sense of where we're at, so Krista's built the plan, first draft. I think we're on revision 3 right now internally, and kind of next step is really focusing in to make sure that we're not tripping over each other with the communications department and how we align these different things so that we're targeting the right content at the right times. There's no sense in talking about Freshette. No sense in talking about Freshette in October. I almost said there's no sense in talking about flood in October, but I realized that that is not the case anymore. But trying to target the right content for the right times. December isn't when you're going to be talking about wildfires, and just being cognizant of how we get the information out using what programs and when. And so that degree of coordination is happening right now. And I would anticipate that this will probably be one of the plans that you guys are going to see sooner rather than later, so that we can get a start on this. The other thing that I want to highlight is that these plans are not, sometimes it's exactly aligned with what our current resourcing is and capacity to actually do all of this stuff, and sometimes it's not. There can be a plan that is, hey, here's what needs to happen, here's our identified resources to complete that plan, and it might be that there's a gap. And so implementation of the plan is sometimes subject to resourcing. And so what I can say in my time here, the demands and expectation on our lone communications person, it was like an astronomical thing when we brought in communications. And this is only 3 and a bit years ago now, and I have no idea how we just keep on saying, and this and this and this. And so part of this discussion is, all right, with current resourcing, how do we maybe balance this between the EPC and the communications person to make sure we're going to have the capacity to actually implement the plan, and sort of just saying, hey, here's what we need to get out, find a way to make it happen. So there's a balancing that needs to come there from how we're actually going to deliver on the services in the plan, because every time you come out with one of these, they stipulate more to do, and that more to do has to come from somewhere.
The things I've definitely worked on trying to have in most of the plans that I've written is recommendations for this reason. With some of these, it's just unrealistic with where we're at to expect this to be done, or to be done in the next number of years. So when you guys get a chance to read this, you'll see that there are recommendations buried into it for further look. And it is the role of the EPC that each year I'll go through and reanalyze these plans, right? Because we might not be in a position to be able to do it this year, but we might be able to in 2 years' time. So, okay. The next one is the heat emergency plan. Again, another work with member of Interior Health. This was actually not on my docket, but as is the way with funding and support sometimes, it turns out that the contact that I have has already done a whole bunch of heat emergency planning for other communities and was more than willing to share a template with me. So since I've already kind of got access to it, I will be working on moving that one forward as well. And if we can get it before the summer, then that'll be apt timing. So yeah. Okay, so a little bit of an update with ESS. So we are consistent with our monthly training. We have our established leadership team with Terry McMillan and Nicole Robinson. And they've been working both themselves and their team through the JIBC online training. Both Nicole and Terry have completed their ESS Directors course, which was awesome. They did an excellent job on that. And we're able to work through ERA training. So both of them are set up to be able to move to this new modernization phase that the EMCR brought out a couple of years ago, which was to try to move to online-based registration to help speed up the process for both evacuees and for suppliers. So they've been working on that. This April, we'll be meeting up with District of Logan Lake. They'll be coming to our community, and we'll be doing a scenario-based training event, and we're going to be having some actors come in, mostly family members of many of the team. And what it's just going to do is provide everybody an opportunity to kind of work through the program, try out different roles in more of a as close to real scenario as possible. So we're really looking forward to that. That is April 13th, I believe. It's a Thursday. You are welcome to come to that one. We might put you to work. Yeah, so that one will be, so typically the team's been meeting every third Thursday. This will be the second Thursday of the month. And it will be starting an hour earlier than usual, so it'll be starting at 6. And this is to allow District of Logan Lake some travel time kind of help, so.
Talent scouts will be
Yeah. The next thing is just to give you guys a little bit of an update on the ESS facility. So originally the ESS facility was located across from the Elks Hall on Coldwater. It unfortunately underwent some damage during the flood, and the ESS kind of items that help with the response activation have kind of been shuffled around several times. They lived in the EOC closet for a little bit. We have found them a temporary home at the Merritt Civic Center right now. But definitely the team is interested in trying to find a little bit more permanency at some point. It has happened a few times now where, you know, if I haven't scheduled usually I schedule 4 months in advance, and if the Civic Center gets booked, sometimes we can get shuffled into different locations and end up in a different meeting room. So we're definitely in conversations with our facilities director and Sean and myself just to kind of keep an eye out for what might be safe location for them. This is not a reception center that we're looking for, and I think it's important to understand the distinction. Anytime that we are managing displaced evacuees, we want to find locations that are in the best interest of the displaced persons. So if we're evacuating in an area, it might actually be better for us to be out of an elementary school or another facility like that. And Civic Center is often one of our primary choices, just because it has washroom facilities and all the things that we might need to get people kind of out of the environment and in a safe location. What the team is looking for, though, is a consistent meeting space. So right now, this is kind of working for our needs, but we're cognizant that we might need to make a move at some point.
I was just wondering if the airport is is there nothing at the airport?
So, yeah, so we've done, this is a great question, and we're chuckling just because this has been one we've kind of labored over for a couple months. So I've gone up and done kind of a site assessment and a safety assessment, and the way it stands right now, it's actually not an ideal location for a lot of our volunteers for a number of reasons. One being that the facility is open 24/7. So sometimes we can have people in there that are not expected to be up there. The other reason is it's quite out of the way, and many of our volunteers are seniors. They have some mobility issues, so that could be problematic. The other thing is that as far as having access to things like projectors and screens and all of that, that's not an easy place for us to start, and we'd have to really put some monies towards investing in the property itself to get it to where it's more usable. So
yeah, I just want to add that there's a really good chance ESS is going to go back in this building once it's rebuilt. That's part of what we're working through with insurance right now. And there might be options presented to change the layout or expand the footprint a little bit to make this more suitable, et cetera. Can it become a multifunctional space and other things that we're kind of working through, pushing the buttons on the insurer's side right now. But when it comes down to it, I think there's a high degree of likelihood that they'll be going into the brand new building when that one is ultimately rebuilt. And
back here on Coldwater?
Yeah. So again, nothing is for sure until I love insurers. I love Adam. But there's a lot of back and forth discussion that goes with what actually goes back and how it gets funded. And so don't want to completely commit, but I think that's kind of plan 1A here, is that they'll be able to go back into a new building that's maybe a little bit more suitable after having been rebuilt.
So that was a write-off, that building?
Yeah.
So just so you know, when I first got in, Dana, I really held my breath and stomped my feet about the airport. But after dealing with Krista and Sean and pointing out some of the things, if we do run into a 24-hour situation, it would not be viable for two ladies to be up there that far out of town by themselves in the dark with only one road in, one road out. Now, I'm assuming, and Krista and I have talked, that if we ended up with another gigantic situation where we had an entire community or half a community coming, that might come into play as an emergency area, right? But
There's not much for parking up there.
well, actually, there is. If you could probably park 200 RVs up there right now with no question.
On the airport street.
Nope, on the 6 properties we have. I mean, you could easily get them in there, but once we level it down, it's different. But I'm assuming it would be a fallback if things really went wrong. But it's just not conducive enough for the safety of the people that'll be working up there. And at first I thought, wow, this is a no-brainer. And then once I started looking at it and hearing their concerns, they've Krista has said if we absolutely positively ever have to use it, we can. But it's not the number one situation.
Okay.
It's just not safe enough.
I think there's also a bit of a breakdown between, as Krista indicated earlier, ESS Reception Center versus the place to store some stuff, so that it's kind of home base for training and other things. And so could it theoretically work on the training side? Yes, but is it any better than the Civic Center, what we're doing right now? Probably not, especially if there's a long-term home coming just around the corner. As it goes for the reception center, that's where I think much harder sell to say the airport is going to be the place where we're welcoming people. There just isn't any services, food, anything else around that kind of makes that feasible. But what we can say, and Krista and I talk about this with a high degree of regularity, is that we know that there needs to be a place that elevates the profile of what the ESS program is. That was actually one of Mayor Getz's big points here is, hey, part of the reason, search and rescue, it has the profile it has is because they have a space, a place to call home, a place that is functionally theirs, in part because of the lease that you guys have allowed notice to go out for as at the last meeting. But with ESS, they have been bounced around a lot, and getting a spot where they can call home is part of that. Krista's also talked about, gear, wearables, other things to make ESS more identifiable and elevate the profile. And so we recognize that is going to be part of ESS's future. And that's going to happen regardless of what the space is. But we just think that as it stands right now, the current operating until we either build this new building or find a long-term home is probably the right approach.
Another thing, and kind of to piggyback on Sean's comments and comments that I alluded to earlier, in tandem with the emergency support plans, is really setting this team up for success. I think for those of you that kind of know the history of ESS in our community, it was run on the back of one volunteer in particular who really kept it alive, and the volunteers that supported her in that. And it, I think, is quickly lost in the shuffle when it doesn't have an identity. So one of the things we've worked really hard with the new leadership team here is making sure that not only are they represented in community with a strong face and they're getting things like uniforms, they are having some additional equipment for response so that they can remain safe on fire scenes where they'll often come to. But the other piece of this is having really strong operating guidelines. So similar to the way search and rescue runs and similar to the fire department is right now we're working each meeting at bringing in new operating procedures to make sure that all volunteers, whether they come in as a walk-in member or they're a regular attending member, that they're able to turn to something and they understand what their responsibility is when they're achieving certain things. And in particular, this team is really important not only to our organization, but I think to the community. And so the best way that we can support our community is by supporting this group and keeping them safe. I think the safety component is really, really important because we are dealing with many volunteers who are of retirement age, and I am not comfortable with putting them in a position where they're not safe. So it's a big reason why this has been pushed so hard over the last year. Any other questions about ESS? Okay. Something that we had kind of discussed during onboarding, but I did want to kind of reiterate, is the fact that I chair the regional EPC meetings that occur quarterly. We're meeting again, and the host community always shuffles to allow communities to be really engaged in the process. It also allows us to talk about how their EOC is set up, what kind of challenges that they might present with, and some of the strengths they have. So we were at District of Logan Lake last time and were able to sit in their EOC. We've also been to TNRD, and Merritt has also hosted. The really key component to this is that it is both myself, TNRD, Kamloops, we have Kelowna and West Kelowna participating at our next one. And we've had a really active participation with our local First Nations, which has been extremely valuable to us because we have a lot of situations where we're dealing with multi-jurisdictional situations, or where one situation maybe impacts Merritt, which means it also likely impacts members from other local communities. We also have a number of members that come from Central Prioc, which is the provincial provincial, regional, EMCR individuals. So what is beneficial in these meetings is that we can bring items up that are concern and challenge for all communities. So some of the things we've talked about, for example, is, if Merritt shuts down roadways, it impacts TNRD members, Coldwater Indian Band, Lower Nicola Indian Band. And so they're able to help support us in creating plans and methods for working through some of those. So it's been really positive to have this, and we are fortunate because this is something that's now going to become a lot more common. I know they're making a push for this in the Vernon area because we've had some success with pushing some ideas and challenges forward. So.
Thank you, Your Worship. This speaks a little bit to what the discussion at the community-to-community forum was as well. And this really is probably our most natural segue to discussing some of the more technical components when it comes to evacuation and other things. There's certainly the policy level, but pretty quickly we get, hey, we want to find a way to stay open when you guys close. That's sort of where the policy ends, and it gets, okay, how do we make that happen on the ground? What if we barricade here? What if we do that? And that's where it gets really difficult. If there was a whole bunch of kind of the elected leaders around the room, we don't necessarily expect that level of input, and even talking with some of the chiefs afterwards, I don't think that's their expectation either, but making sure that some of those concerns are heard and addressed and can be brought to this regional EPC table, I think is where a lot of that is going to get addressed. And if that results in changes to a City of Merritt plan, it's going to get brought in through you at this committee. And so hopefully that helps you understand a little bit of how the workflow might work on that.
There we go. Maybe? Okay. That's an important component, I think, to recognize is if there are things that are coming up at your guys' level that you think need to be addressed at these meetings, where we're kind of at the point where rubber needs to meet the road, please do let me know. I'm more than happy to kind of explore some solutions with this team. It's the goal of this is really to be very proactive. We're able to kind of move things along at a little bit of a faster pace. So yeah. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we're going to kind of take a look at the emergency plan. And so just so you can kind of get your head wrapped around what I'm talking about, this is our community emergency plan. It is not done in its totality, and in here exists a combination of, our 2005 adopted plan as well as other annexes and appendices that help support this. And where we might not have something specific to Merritt in existence, what I do have is other plans that have been produced by the province or I think in one case by another community that we can kind of adopt so that at least if we run into something, we've got some capacity to move forward and some initial benchmarks to take into consideration. So, so every year, to the best of my abilities, I go through these plans and kind of look at where we are at. We are running off of the 2005 version of our community emergency plan. So I do have the recommendation that we look at finding a way to fund this. Now, right now, based on current funding, there isn't something specific to replace our community emergency plan, and we're likely looking at a budget line item of over $20,000. So if this is something that we cannot get funding for, or we're not willing to wait for 2, 3, 4 years until funding comes around for it, it is something that we have to take into consideration moving forward, is whether this is something that the city will commit to doing in the future.
And that might be low.
That might be low. That's my optimistic hat. I think that's probably where it starts at, and I think how involved we want it to be is kind of dependent on that. Now, in order to do that really well, I'll actually have you take note of the last item line on there, which is our hazard, risk, and vulnerability analysis. So this one is done from 2007. And for those of you guys that have lived in community for some time, you know that Merritt has changed and evolved significantly since 2007. It is my recommendation that we actually complete a new HRVA before we do the new CEP, because much of what occurs within the CEP is based on the recommendations from our HRVA, which is that hazard risk analysis. So two things that are extremely important, and these need to be, the community emergency plan is one that I could likely take some time and do in-house, but it would be pretty time consuming, and we would have to note that as part of a work plan. The HRVA is not one that I'm able to do at this point. It really requires some technical skill that is beyond my scope at this point.
I just want to add that while the risks identified in that HRVA, lots of them are going to be pretty common feeling to you, but as there's just the same way you were probably introduced to some new environmental terms over the course of the last few years, whether it's atmospheric river or heat dome. We got things just weren't really contemplated in 2007. So even though there will be sections on extreme heat and there will be sections on flood, we have more nuance that we can add into that plan. We also have a lot better idea of what some of these emergencies look like in the city of Merritt now. Even the degree of planning that we have been going through for 2017, 2018, 2020 with the Nicola River flooding, the coordination with the provincial government, the Upper Nicola Band, there's so much more there that we know with a greater degree of acuity what the hazards are, what the risks are, what vulnerabilities we have, and where specifically those vulnerabilities exist. And so I'll say that if you look at this plan in general terms right now, you could probably look at it and say, I mean, what's going to change on this? But what's going to change is there's going to be a lot more specificity added into each one of these risks and a lot more specific vulnerabilities identified and what we can do to mitigate those. And so it's maybe not going to look from a content perspective like, all right, we had flood before, now we have flood again. But there's going to be a whole lot of subsets to what flood looks like now that we just did not have then.
And that's really important because when we look at developing plans, like we can provide general frameworks, which is, you know, it will begin the phase of being able to respond. But when we can get into detail and we understand those risks better, we can adopt much more thorough plans, which just means that our move from response to recovery is that much faster. And I think that's really key. I think we all recognize in here that being in the recovery phase is extremely difficult for staff, for community members. And so when we can reduce that time where we're kind of sitting in this limbo of not yet at a new normal, that's to everybody's benefit.
Where we were vulnerable up on the bench, and that's where Tom Lacey went in and put that fire guard in. That's where those kind of recommendations come out of that. They can come from the HRVA. Because wildfire is such a specific risk, we actually have another program which I do speak to later, which is our Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And we are actually going to be up for renewal. The fire department will work towards that. There's also new requirements coming out of UBCM. So it will move to a community wildfire resiliency plan in the future, which is fairly similar to what we have in existence. But those plans are excellent because they provide GIS mapping, spatial data that really helps inform much more solid planning when we move into things like looking at how we're going to manage suppression planning should we have an event come into community.
So Krista, just a quick question. So when we're talking about wildfire, I've had some meetings with Jen, who's confirmed that a lot of the fire breaks have been completed. does she transfer that information to you for this vulnerability analysis, or is that something we have to request? I'm just curious.
So a lot of that information involving fuel management goes directly to the fire chief. The fire chief has a really good working relationship with our fire zone and the local base here. And so we also work with a company, Bruce Blackwell, and BA Blackwell comes in, and when they complete a lot of the spatial data, they'll connect with those stakeholders to make sure that they have accurate information.
So this is not going to be a perfect relationship, but Krista really is right that hazard risk vulnerability analysis, this is like your parent document that is going to inform everything, including your community emergency plan. So I said CPP, that's really not what it is, it's CEP. In your community emergency plan, you're going to have kind of broad-based plans for just about everything you can imagine. And then, as Krista indicated, if there's a high level of specificity on any one of these, like your community wildfire protection plan, that's like a third layer deep past this. Some of these are actually going to have a layer of specificity, but it will just be in appendices within the community emergency plan, but we actually have a lot of refinement that we can do where probably all of our plans ought to be appendices to the community emergency plan. We're not quite there yet, but we'll get there. Things that aren't done yet, but we're already talking, we've had meetings with the province about, for example, around like dam operation and freshet preparedness, so that we, as not just the city of Merritt, but we're on the same page with Upper Nicola, with the province itself, as to how we are going to collectively manage for freshet. What actions are we going to take? And so I think that understanding that somewhat hierarchical relationship is that the community emergency plan is going to be the one that is I'd call it almost the official community plan comparator, in that it's going to be the high level document that guides almost every policy, but you're going to have things, whether it's an appendix or another plan out of that have a lot more specificity, and that emergency plan is really informed by that updated modern risk analysis.
So just a quick thought here. With everything that we've gone through with fires and the floods and everything, and the information from Jen, would it be beneficial at some point to start getting some of this information out to the community, like contacting the River Forecasting Center to see what our snow load is in both north and south, affecting Nicola, just to get some of that out to the people, because they're starting to ask these questions. And, talking to Jen, finding out that the fire breaks have been done might be an idea to get some of that information out to the public, whether it's a blurb in the paper or something on our website or something we can point to, because one of the things people are living and dying by right now because of the cold water situation is the fact, what has the River Forecasting Center got us for snowpack at this point in time? And, of course, that's all dependent on the weather. But at least if we can get that out, and we can let people know, I do believe we're 40% lower than we normally are this year, which is great, but that then causes an issue come the heat time. So I'm just wondering, do we go that far, or are we stepping out of our bounds by doing that kind of thing?
I would encourage Mayor and Council to take a look at our website today. We have a spring freshet announcement that was just made today as to where we're at with snowpack levels, what preparation looks like. And so, again, this is all part of the second we start feeling that rise from the public. We really want to have this scheduled and get a bit of a gut feel, because this is something that Krista and I have talked about, is you want to have the right message at the right time. Nobody's talking freshet in January, probably not even talking about it in February, but as soon as the weather starts getting nice again, it's, hey, what's happening with Nicola Lake? Have they dumped Nicola Lake yet? Is this thing as low as it can be? What's happening here? And so we're trying to kind of catch a feel in the community for when do people start asking these questions so that we can be prepared with responses. And so we've got references to Brenda Mines, shovel nose gauge, showing that here in Merritt we're actually about 98% of normal, and checking, this was based on a week old information. We've come down from there even. We just haven't had a lot of snow in the last couple months, so we were way over normal coming into end of December. We were all a little bit, oh no, what could we be in for? But it's been pretty light through the rest of the time. But what we don't want to say, and this is where we always get a little bit nervous as people that are involved in emergency planning is 98% of normal is probably exactly where you want it to be, but it doesn't mean that heavy rains in June can't put you in trouble. And so in fact, that's really what drove the risk in 2020. We did not have any real snowpack risk, and the snow was all melted before we were actually getting into that stress zone. And so we want to provide this information, but at the same time, having a healthy degree of, hey, I still need to be mindful, I need to think about this, is something that we want to encourage without inciting panic or terror in anybody, because that doesn't do any good either. So we just always need to know that we're always at some degree of risk. Coming into it right now, man, I'm thrilled when I see 98%. Like, maybe no drought, maybe no flood, like this is a dream, we love this, until we don't. And we just have to be ready for that until we don't. And that's what we're going to be kind of counting on this committee and our communications, and hopefully nailing that down. So in that article, the one thing that I want to say is we've got some links to emergency preparedness generally, the sandbagging facility where people can go to get that, and a whole bunch of links directly to like the actual gauges themselves, so we can hopefully teach people to look at, hey, where is this Brenda Mine gauge? How can I find how much snow there is? So trying to elevate the level of information that is available if people want it without terrifying them.
So that's on our website?
Yeah,
okay.
As of today.
Okay, good. I think all councillors should know that in case we get questioned. We can say, hey, go to the city website. So thank you.
Would you like me to blast an email at all council on that?
Sure, that'd be a good idea. That way we're forewarned and informed, because we're going to get asked. It's that simple.
Okay, that sounds great.
Is the Brookmere gauge being fixed?
Has it even been found?
I understand that I don't want to actually overspeak on this. There's been lots of conversation on the Brookmere gauge. We will have a follow-up discussion as to what the plans are. Is that? Yeah, I see you making a note of it. So good, Krista. I don't think it's currently operational.
One thing I did to kind of want to just reiterate here is it's really, really important when we look at educating public that much of the way that we've really attempted to approach this is understanding that we give as much information as we are able to give, but that we really point people towards the authority having jurisdiction. I think the city would be remiss to get, sorry, my apologies, I'm just going to make sure this is, no, okay. It's really important that the city doesn't get into the business of speaking on behalf of other agencies. So it's really, really important, and you'll notice that I'm pretty diligent in ensuring that information that does come out from the city, that it is in reference to that specific authority, because situations also evolve and change really quickly, and we don't want somebody looking at material from 2 weeks ago and then things have shifted, and for the city to be held liable for something that really isn't ours to own to begin with. And another thing I just kind of wanted to speak on is the importance of kind of having these levels of planning. The real importance on this again is that this needs to live outside of one person or a group or several people having local knowledge. We have a fire chief who has like an incredible amount of knowledge about the community that he is born and raised in and has worked very hard to protect. And sadly, the day that he retires, in the next decade, we're going to lose a lot of knowledge. And so when we can make a move to move that information onto a plan somewhere, it at least allows the next kind of person that's responsible for that to ensure that continues to move forward. And so having things like an airport response plan, for example, which is something we'll talk about later, is really, really key, because what happens when that individual is not there to kind of spearhead those efforts? Okay, so...
just want to add one quick point. Brookmere is operational. Whether it's reading correctly, we'll confirm, but it is operational.
So couple of other things we're working on, just making sure that our critical infrastructure list is up to date, and I will be touching base with development services to make sure we are happy with where we landed, because we developed this pretty heavily during our wildfire season in 2021. And then we're kind of currently in the process of going through city policies as well, so we'll make sure that we review anything that's specific to emergency management. So other things that need to be adapted and changed, the resource inventory and supply agreements also need to be adjusted. A lot of the information's a little bit older. So we are working with a plan that was kind of developed mid-emergency, both during wildfire season and during flood season, where we made contacts with local companies or companies that could muster within a reasonable amount of time to community. Our evacuation plan is complete, and our CWPP, as I mentioned before, is going to be looking at a renewal next year. The psychosocial plan is in draft. We have an emergency potable water plan from 2014. This is something that's going to be reviewed, and will have to be reviewed from somebody that is not myself, because that is not my area of expertise. So we'll look at having that done in the next few years. And there's been some communication between both myself, our IO during emergencies, Greg Lawis, and then of course Kim Mullen, our communications manager, about having a more in-depth crisis communication plan. So it's definitely something that we know needs to be produced. We know that IO is a section within emergencies that expands quite quickly, because the amount of information coming in and coming out is quite extensive, so that is on our plan.
You guys know what IO is? Information Officer?
Thank you. Great, yeah, and we'll be touching base on the heat emergency plan this year, hopefully. Another thing that I've kind of started working through, and again, this is where we talk about those levels of emergency planning, is looking at coming up with a temporary hospital closure procedure. So if for some reason I'm not in community or somebody else is fulfilling a role, they're able to kind of flip to the section that says, I need to do A, B, then C, then D, and we kind of move forward from there. We're working, both myself and Sean Strang have had discussions about really taking the lessons learned from our cold water flood and working towards developing a recovery plan. So that'll be something that we need to be looking at in the future. How that will be accomplished, I'm not sure, but we know it's on the radar. The ESS plan is in draft. We also have just some things that are kind of important to note. TNRD has an evacuation plan that obviously impacts the city, so that exists within the plan, as well as the Rock and River emergency plan from last year. And while they won't be having anything this year, my expectation is that in the future, if they come back, that we'll likely see new adaptations as their festival adapts.
Is that something that all festivals up there would follow then? Like the base coast?
That is a good question. So this is specific to that event. So it's not one that Base Coast would have.
They do have emergency evacuation?
I imagine they have something, but I haven't physically seen anything to know what that looks like. And so again, when we talk about authority kind of having jurisdiction, this sits in the TNRD. So I don't have an ability to turn to them and say, hey, I would like to see your plan. It's a nicety, and it's appreciated because the likelihood of them using City of Merritt facilities is very high.
I do want to flag as well that it's not that we don't know anything about how we would approach an emergency. So, for example, we take Rock and River or Base Coast, where ultimately they contract our fire services to sort of be on site during these events. There's some degree of planning that goes into particular components of what that emergency might look like, but it's not necessarily federated into an overall event emergency plan. And so I don't want you to think that there's no planning that is currently in place for these events. There absolutely is. Though I think it's just how it gets wrapped up so that it can hopefully be an ongoing plan that evolves year over year.
Okay, well, I was just thinking too that when they made their presentation to us, we didn't even ask about this. And I got an email yesterday that there was literally only 75 tickets left for sale for that event.
So we've met with them on a Zoom call, and they do have their security situation in play. They are looking for some help with that. They don't feel they want to absorb the cost anymore, which traditionally happens with everybody. But I think it wouldn't be hard to get a hold of them and say, hey, what are your plans? And I don't think it would be hard to get it all. Sean?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and this is where, don't shoot the messenger. It's going to sound like government bureaucracy, but it goes to Krista's point earlier where she used the words authority having jurisdiction. Since the festival grounds are not in the city of Merritt, it actually isn't the city of Merritt's emergency plans that they're necessarily beholden to. So we'll let you know that we have regular conversations with the TNRD sharing our expectations on what their process needs to look like so that they don't download all of this stuff on us, because we know that at the end of the day, if something goes wrong, it's not our responsibility, but we're the one that's going to wear it. And so I do want to kind of iterate that when we're talking about an emergency plan, this is not necessarily the city's plan, or it shouldn't be the city's plan. It really ought to be a plan between the event organizer and the TNRD, where they let the city know what portions of that plan they need the city to be involved with and ensure that the city is adequately resourced and funded to provide those portions of the plan. And so when it comes to providing fire services, for example, that is through the TNRD, where they are largely the ones that kind of broker that, have that, and say, hey, city would be the one to deliver these services, and we provide that. We're really trying to encourage that model instead of having folks come directly to the city on stuff, because we just aren't the authority on this. And if we look like we're the authority, it puts us in a unique spot from a liability perspective, because we really shouldn't be. But it also puts us in a spot where we're cutting out an important decision maker from their own process.
So sitting on the TNRD, Dan, it would be very simple for me just to ask the question. And I probably will just get a hold of Scott and let him know that we have a concern and how they're moving on it. So that's probably, I'll just discuss this with Sean, but I'm sure we'll be able to get, because no sense me going to sitting in those chairs if I can't ask questions, right? So we'll do that.
And I think we're fortunate, like I work quite closely with Kevin Skrupnik and Mike Knopf, so there's a very clear understanding, at least between ourselves and the TNRD, that in the event a situation occurs on TNRD, the expectation is that they will call the city and ask what we have capacity for. And as a mental note, this is not typically something that is covered under ESS. So if a situation was to occur, it's really on the company's, it's ultimately the company's responsibility to kind of make provisions for their participants. So.
But haven't you sort of been responsible? You've got Rock and River emergency plans.
Yep. So the reason I have it there is because there is a notation in there that says that in the event that there is an emergency, that they are going to contact the TNRD would contact us, and we might provide, for example, perhaps the arena, right? We might make an agreement with the TNRD that says you can bring members to the arena, they can come here until they're ready to move, you know. If we're evacuating 5,000 people from the grounds, those people have to land somewhere. So that's how that process goes. So we've been really careful to make sure that the language in there is specific and does not hold the city of Merritt responsible or liable for anything. Okay. Any other questions?
And so we do want you to not just have visibility into the discussion on the plans. If there's any one of these plans that you're saying, hey, I think that we need to dig into early, or whatever the case is, know that you're allowed to do that. This isn't a block. So if you say, hey, I want to see what that plan looks like, can we bring that forward to the next meeting? That's inbounds. Not saying you should do that, but if you want to, that's open. Don't feel like this is, secret stuff.
Yeah. Don't feel
Okay. So the next piece that we have, so we have our EPE plan, which is in draft. That's our preparedness plan. Ooh, is that it? Oh, no. I'm like, I feel like there's a little bit more. Okay, so that might be it. So that's kind of where we stand now. I just realized what I don't have on there, but I wrote down here not to forget, is that we have things like our airport response plan. So in the last 5 years or so, we've had 2 airport emergencies. We definitely need to be providing some planning responsibilities for that. So we have a number of things that don't yet exist that we likely need to create in the fold. It's just a process of kind of identifying those that are the most important and have the most value added in. And ultimately, again, it comes down to having a really succinct HRVA plan. Because if we know where our hazards, our risks, and our vulnerabilities are, we can better plan for those. So, are there any questions? That was a lot of information. So,
The whole thing is starting to make a lot more sense to me now. Thank you for going through all of this today.
So, this is why I enjoy these kind of close committees like this. And of course, you're going to be on a teaching phase for all of us. So, and I think as we get our feet underneath us and we understand this a little bit more and we see the vision and stuff like that, then we can ask more questions, do more support. And it's, it's nice to know that a lot of this stuff is going to be on the website where we can direct people to it. So, no, I appreciate it.
Can I just make one other plug? We are really leaning into Voyant Alert notifications right now for our emergency program. Our numbers are growing. We're really happy with that. But our hope is that to the degree possible, you on this EEC and council as a whole will be champions for our Voyant program. So in the news update that we've got here, there's again a link to that. And so feel free to blast and plug and encourage people to get on Voyant, be leaders in that area, because that is one of the biggest things when it comes down to crisis communication. Even though, as Krista said, we still want to adopt a plan for it, know that in the absence of a plan, we're making internal plans, and those plans are heavily dependent on making sure that we can get the word out to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible in the event of an emergency. And Voyant is currently our best option for doing that. We are also looking at and will implement the broadcast intrusive alert system, where you sometimes get those weird things from the province. We can tap into that. There's a bit of a process and a procedure that we are still kind of, well, we haven't had occasion to do it here ourselves, but we know how to do it, at least in theory. And so we would be utilizing those depending on the scope and scale of the event. But what we want to do is nail down through a plan what specific incidents, what severity, what are we talking about that's going to be the threshold for that broadcast intrusive alert versus just Voyant. And we still have a lot of those things we need to work through, but champion Voyant as much as you can. That's my last little plug here.
Well, I would be cautious too. Like we discussed this, Sean, early on when we were getting yellow alerts because it was going to be -10. Don't want to start overloading people with stuff we already know is happening and we can see clearly what's happening, because you'll end up, it's like the car alarm that goes off in Walmart. Nobody gives a crap anymore, right? It just goes off. Nobody cares. So if you start to overload people with minute stuff that doesn't really have a meaning, and I'll be honest with you, every time that Voyant alert goes off, my wife freaks out. It happens, even if it's for the smallest thing. So just as long as we're doing for stuff that matters and not every single thing, I think that kind of waters it down.
That's fair. And we are really distinguishing between those things that come up as a notice through Voyant Alert. And so you'll notice that our hospital closures, they haven't come up with the I'm not going to try repeating that sound again. I'm horrible at it. But it comes up as a, hey, heads up, emergency is closing, and that's part of this procedure, again, that Krista's working on for how we're going to provide that information. We want people to know where it is that they would need to go for those emergency services, but that's probably not one that gets a ringing alert, whereas there are options in lots of situations where we are going to say, hey, this is ringing alert worthy.
Well, ladies and gentlemen.
Is there anything that we've kind of covered that you think needs further looking into, or anything that you would like to definitely be reviewing by next meeting?
I'm going to go over my slides.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And you're welcome to email me with anything when you've had some time to digest this. But do let me know if there's things that you think you'd like to delve into a little bit deeper. My strong assumption is that our next meeting is going to be reviewing the drafts that we currently have in place to try to get those fully active as quickly as possible. But if there's something that you think is lacking, omitted, or that you just need a stronger grasp of, please let me know.
Are those manuals for us?
So these are mine. I'm like, oh no. But if you're curious and kind of want to see what I've developed, I'm happy to kind of show you what I've got here. Yeah.